volatile and restless Flemish community, with the Catholic Curia consecrating this unequal relationship, led to the outburst of youthful enthusiasm as early as May 1966. The French May 1968 was by no means the first general societal conflagration to mark European and world politics in the long 60s, though it became the shot that was heard around the world. Religious and secular radical currents now engaged in a joint race to the top, mutually reinforcing each other, arm in arm, so to speak, creating a seemingly unstoppable dynamic. What I'm trying to suggest is this. Catholic radicalization in the wake of Vatican II in many cases preceded the radicalization of secular communities. The United States is, of course, an important exception, thanks to the early development of the civil rights movement, though here, again, the religious component is obviously present very centrally as well. Radical New Left movements, of course, often predated the World Council of the Catholic Church, but in many national contexts they remained rather weak up to the early to mid-1960s and even all the way up to the calendar year of 1968. But already prior to 1968, Catholic communities had importantly undergone a process of significant radicalization for several important years. Thus, by 1968, Catholic activists of the flourishing Catholic left were already seasoned veterans of any number of important movements, so that by the time society at large began to move in or around 1968, the role of Catholic activists in the wider social movements of that era was disproportionately important, disproportionate compared to their numerical presence in society as a whole. Earlier on, I suggested that a run-through of the most famous student leaders of the generation of '68 will uncover a significant number of card-carrying Catholics. But perhaps they were solely important, but ultimately numerically unrepresentative, isolated products of Catholic protest cultures. Here, a quick look at Catholic universities suggests that Paul Goossens, Mario Capanna, and Tom Rechtin were merely symbolic spokespersons for a much larger trend. In Western Europe, with an amazing regularity, Catholic universities were in the forefront and the vanguard of student movements in the long 60s. I have already referred a little bit to the events at La Cattolica in Milano. What I did not mention is that it was precisely at La Cattolica where the Italian student movement first made it big. The campus occupation in October 1967 at La Cattolica was the very first campus occupation in all of Italy to gain national attention. And La Cattolica would continue to play an important role in Italian radical student politics for the remainder of the 60s. The cradle of Italian student protest, however, lay a little bit northeast of Milan. It was in the unlikely location of the small town of Trento, on the western edges of the Dolomites, where in October 1966, the very first of all Italian campus occupations in the long 60s occurred. That very first occupation did not yet make national headline news when it happened, largely because this campus was then still rather small. But within student circles, it became rather famous rather quickly and served to inspire subsequent campus struggles, not the least of which at La Cattolica. The Institute of Sociology, as the precursor of today's University of Trento was then still called, was a creation of the Catholic hierarchy, and the student body was almost exclusively composed of Catholic students from throughout Italy at that time. I earlier mentioned Paul Goossens as the Rudi Dutschke of the Flemish part of Belgium. The institution he attended, and which he helped to turn upside down, was none other than the Catholic University of Leuven, the oldest Catholic university north of the Alps and the largest university on Flemish soil. In fact, the very first Western European university to become the center of a national controversy in the course of the 1960s was not any one of the branch campuses of the University of Paris or the Free University of Berlin or any of the other ones. The first Western European university town to witness running battles between demonstrators and police was the Flemish town of Leuven. The very Catholic University of Leuven, founded in 1425, holds the honor of having sparked a major controversy leading to militant altercations in the city's streets and the polarization of public opinion in the country at large. And it will by now come as no surprise that the campus where Tom Rechtin plied his trade in the mid-60s was none other than the biggest Catholic university in the Netherlands, University of Nijmegen. It was there that the functional equivalent to West German and American SDS was created, and from where it spread across the Netherlands, the Studentenwakbeweging. For the non-Dutch amongst my listeners, this means student trade union movement, literally translated. But the final spark, which led to a chain reaction of radical protest across the Netherlands, was struck in Tilburg, 80 kilometers to the southwest of Nijmegen, yet once again strongly suggesting an intimate link between Catholic sociabilities and societal revolt. For Tilburg was the home to another Catholic post-secondary institution of higher learning, the Katholieke Hogeschool Tilburg, KHT. And it was the KHT which became the first Dutch university to explode. As late as 1963, 83% of all Tilburg students at the KHT attended regular Sunday Mass. The occasion for open battle to erupt in Tilburg arose in the context of an ongoing campus-wide debate on the democratization of the Tilburg University administration, with students asking for co-determination on all levels. In the late evening of the 28th of April 1969, students organized in the Linksfront took over the assembly hall where the University Senate had, at 8 p.m. that evening, decided to firmly reject the students' demands. The next morning, the university's telephone exchange was likewise taken over by an angry crowd. It would go too far, and time has run out, to further describe the dynamics of the Dutch student revolt, which some of you are probably more familiar than I am. The point is that it all began at a Catholic university, just like the radical SVB, the Studentenwakbeweging, had first taken hold on the largest Catholic university campus in the Netherlands. To return briefly to Tilburg, in the course of this unprecedented bout of activism on the campus of the Katholieke Hogeschool, the first campus occupation in the Netherlands, a rapid learning process fundamentally changed the hearts and minds of an entire cohort of students. The free-flowing atmosphere at the college during the period of the occupation, the intensive discussions, the mutual bonds forged in the common struggle were a unique experience which resulted in something resembling a conversion experience affecting many students. The conversion experience, in this case, of course, refers to a sudden radicalization of their personal and political outlook, powerfully reinforcing, if anything, the process of distanciation from their traditional Catholic upbringing. It may be asked then, what role the Catholic background of those student activists played in the course of the events in Nijmegen, Tilburg, the Netherlands, and elsewhere. Tom Rechtin was only one of many participant observers who drew attention to the link between Catholicism and radical activism in the long 60s. I quote from his autobiography. Right at this time, radical currents clamoring for renewal gripped Catholic milieus. It was the time of the Dutch Pastoral Council, A move for the non-Dutch amongst you, incredibly enough supported by the entire Dutch Catholic hierarchy to almost revolutionize the Dutch Catholic Church. And then I return to Rechtin. And Nijmegen and Tilburg had woken up some time ago from the hibernation induced by unquestioning obedience to Roman authorities. There was a mutual influence of religious and political nonconformism, by means of which the authority of the Pope, as much as the authority of the Katholieke Volkspartij, the Dutch Catholic Party par excellence, came under attack. End of citation from Rechtin. Did Catholicism thus play a role primarily as a negative foil against which to revolt? Yes and no. These instances of Catholic universities becoming the primary breeding grounds for radical revolt exemplify the truism that the link between Catholicism and social movements does not always have to be a straightforwardly supportive one. Catholicism can also play a negative role as a perceived authoritarian belief system against which one feels compelled to revolt, all the more so if one is Catholic oneself. Obvious manifestations of such negative mechanisms are confrontations with the concrete incarnations, so to speak, of the Catholic Church, are unloved, if not despised, power brokers. It should also be noted that often the particular contribution of Catholicism, in my view, to the incursions of social movements consists of both elements at once: positive reinforcement and negative repulsion, even and especially within the minds of rapidly evolving single individuals. One and the same person may well be propelled by a profound sense of social justice, at least partially rooted in the lessons learned during your religious instruction as a child, to question authority, notably Catholic authority figures. And there is no better target for such righteous rage than a hostile university administrator at a Catholic institution of higher learning, or, as was the case in Leuven, an entire episcopacy aligned against the wishes of a mobilizing community. 5 more minutes? It was by no means solely in the university and student milieu where radical Catholicism inspired secular comrades to reach for the sky. In a number of Romance language countries, the leading organizations of the New Left were far more than just student organizations. Above all, in the Mediterranean countries of Southern Europe, the New Left took the form of openly political parties, or as in Spain, they tried to organize as best as they could in the underground. The French New Left political party was the Parti Socialiste-Unifié, PSU, which played a major role in the student radicalization of the French 60s, but likewise left a lasting imprint on French society as a whole, beyond the university milieu. Significant sections of the PSU came straight out of the French Catholic, left Catholic milieu. In Spain, the functional equivalent of the PSU in France was the Frente de Liberación Popular, FLP, founded, like much of the European New Left, in 1956. The first half dozen years of its existence, for the first half dozen years of its existence, the FLP in Spain was, for practical purposes, largely composed of activists in the burgeoning Catholic left. And the FLP had a significant influence within the anti-Franco milieus in Spain all the way up to 1969, when the FLP, like much of the New Left elsewhere in the world, rapidly dissolved. Yet, perhaps the most interesting case study of the crucial influence of the Catholic left on social movements in the long 60s would be a quick look at the radicalization process in the workers' movement at that time. For the Catholic left was by no means limited to the student milieu. In fact, the Catholic influence amongst working class activists was, if anything, certainly in Catholic Europe, even larger than the equivalent processes turning university campuses upside down. But time is running out. So all I wish to say on this topic is this. The first wave of radical Catholicism from the mid-40s to the mid-50s is probably internationally best known for a peculiar innovation, the emergence of a group of militant worker priests who gave up their sultan for working class blue in factories, mines, construction sites, and the merchant marine. Even though there were but 100 such worker priests in France in total, and 8, no more, in Belgium, and none anywhere else, their image and their sometimes iconoclastic actions were heard around the world by anyone who cared to listen. What is far less well known, however, is that the second wave of left Catholicism in the wake of Vatican II not only spawned a revival of this most unusual tradition, but that the numbers far outgrew the handful of activists 15 years earlier. In France alone, more than 2,000 such worker priests went into the factories to change the world. In Italy, 350 such worker priests greeted Vatican emissaries at their annual convention in 1976 with clenched fists raised and the powerful chant of the International. Hundreds of Spanish priests defied the hierarchy and the Franco dictatorship by leaving their parishes for the assembly line, etc., etc. But an entirely unprecedented new organization likewise saw the light of day beyond the revival of the worker priests. Secular and regular priests, amongst which the new left worker priests were only a small minority, in virtually every single Western European and many extra-European countries, began to form general associations of radical priests during and after the calendar year of 1968. Their opposition to the strictures of celibacy often formed the initial stimulus for the emergence of a movement of priests openly defying their hierarchy. But their protests soon went beyond this single issue to attack much more generalized social concerns. Soon the individual national groupings forged transnational ties. And the first coordinated international protest action of these red priests occurred in July 1969 at the occasion of a preparatory conference of European bishops in the oldest town of Switzerland, curiously and symbolically called Curia, well, Kur in Swiss German, in view of an upcoming extraordinary world synod of bishops in Rome. It gathered dissident priests from most Western European and again some extra-European countries. And it propelled the so-called Christian Solidarity International Congress onto the front pages of the international media. Subsequent actions took place in October 1969 in Rome, with a further assembly of radical priests in Amsterdam from the 28th of September to the 3rd of October 1970, allowing for a first concrete link and mutual inspiration between, above all, European and Latin American activists. A news and information service run by the International Documentation and Information Center, EDOC, facilitated links between the far-flung network of radical parish and regular priests. EDOC, of course, was originally founded and financed by the Dutch Catholic Church in the days of Vatican II. The reason I wish to end with this all but forgotten Christian Solidarity International Congress is this. The organizational dynamo behind this initially European assembly of priests was the Dutch contingent, organized into Septuagint, animated notably by Jan Reuter and Jan van Kilstonk, the two priests sitting in the car following the hearse at the funeral of Tom Rechtin in 1989. Profiting from the conjunctural progressive outlook of the Dutch episcopacy, as some of you know much better than I, Dutch Catholicism in the 60s had become a laboratory of radical activism on all sorts of fronts. And the rapid growth of the Dutch Association of Radical Priests in Septuagint was without equivalent anywhere else in the world. Whereas all other national sections of the Christian Solidarity International Congress, usually organized between 1% and 3% of parish priests, at most 5%, Septuagint in the Netherlands was the spiritual an organizational home to an astounding 25% of Dutch parish priests at that time. Last paragraph. If the provost and the kabouters provide the classic, graphic, and ludic example of mostly secular manifestations of the spirit of 1968, sending shockwaves far beyond the borders of the Orange State, Septuagint, the Amsterdamse Studentenecclesia, the Dutch Catechism, and EDOC constituted the religious counterpart. It is difficult to say which was of greater influence in their respective communities, in society as a whole, and in other parts of Europe. But what is certain is that there is no better case study to exemplify the creative and constructive confluence of the spirit of Vatican II and the spirit of 68 than the Netherlands in the long 60s. Thank you.